Hi, I'm Steve. I'm an alcoholic. It's cool to be here. There's a lot of people. I lived in Salt Lake from about, I want to say it was 94 till 2002 or something like that. I lived here for 9 years or something. And I see there's some people here tonight who I remember from pretty far back, if not the very beginning. So it's going to be kind of interesting telling my story tonight, because I'm going to. I like having these flashes of memory. I'm already remembering things that I didn't remember. But Aaron always helps me with that. Aaron, those of you who know Aaron always tells me these things I said or I did 10 years. Today he told me how I used to throw paper airplanes at people in meetings who shared too long, and I don't. And I don't think I ever did that, but Aaron seems to have a better memory than me. But my sobriety date is February 24th, 1990. I'm 36 years old. I got sober when I was 17. I have my home group is the Reality Farm group in San Francisco. It meets on Thursday nights at 8:30. If you're ever in San Francisco, you should come by. It's a good meeting. And I have a sponsor, and I have some sponsees, and I have some service positions. I have a service position at my home group, and I do some H&I work. I really like H&I work. I want to put my plug in for hospitals and institutions. We have an amazing network of that. I live in Oakland, California now, and we have it's an incredible network of doing that. You got to go to a meeting on H&I to get certified before you can even do it, because they have so many people who want to do it. But it's been a great deal. So I had drinking. I'm from Southern California originally, Los Angeles area, Manhattan Beach, and I came from a pretty good home. I got two parents who are still together, the earliest drinks were like stealing. From an early age, I always my mom would have dinner parties and have wine and oysters and stuff like that, and I would always go around to all the adults and ask them for a sip of wine, and doing that early on. I remember I stole this one thing. I stole a Coors Light out of my dad's out of the refrigerator when I was 8 years old or 7 years old, something like that, and I put it in the dresser in my room, and I took a sip of it every day, and I was like, oh, this is terrible. Why do adults drink this? And I put it back in the drawer, and I put it back in, and every day I would come home and take a sip of it when I was I don't know why. I don't think that's alcohol. I don't know if that means I'm alcoholic or anything, but it's what I did. I found it's best that when I tell my story, I try not to give too many opinions, even on my own story, because saying this happened because of this is because I found over the years I can't say, well, I stayed sober all these years because I did these things. I really don't know what's kept me sober. I can tell you that I stayed sober while I did certain things, so I can just tell you the things that happened, and hopefully God will tell you whatever you need to hear from that. So the first time getting loaded actually wasn't alcohol. I have some drugs in my story. I think that's okay. I noticed that Bill talked about sedatives in his story, so I think I'm covered. I got some really good pure alcoholism in my story too. You're going to enjoy that. No drugs involved. But it started for me with smoking pot long before I drank, for a couple of years before that, and it was around 8th grade. And I just remember when I got loaded for the first time and laying down on my friend's floor, I was always, from an early age, I was the smallest kid in school. I went to this Catholic school. It was like Lord of the Flies. It was the same 30 kids for 8 years, and I was the smallest kid with braces and glasses and a flat top, and parents bought me one outfit a year, and then I wore it every day, and it was just brutalized, So, but I was just afraid all the time, It's if I were to blame my alcoholism on any psychological factor, I would have blamed it on that, because it wasn't my family. But I remember I had these friends who were sort of the cool friends, and my friends Jason and Justin, and I wanted them to. They started smoking pot around 8th grade, and they were cool. They were the cool guys. They were kind of hung out with the cool kids, but they also hung out with poor me, the outcast nerd kid. And I'm really begging them to get me high, and they finally got me high, and I'm laying down in Jason's mom's bathroom, looking at the ceiling, and thinking I want to die like this. Like, this is the best I've ever felt my whole life. Like, and it's like all, like, 3 years of dare education just went out the window. And I remember I was like replaying my whole dare education and I was just basically saying, like, thinking to it all came unraveling. I was just like, it's all a lie. Like, it's all, like, it's a giant conspiracy. They don't want you to find out, you know? And I don't know what I thought, but it was just like, you know, like, because nothing bad happened. Like, I got loaded. Nothing bad happened. Everything good happened. Like, everything was great. And you know, I got to say from the very beginning, I've always assumed, even into many years of sobriety, like probably 5 or 10 years sober, I always assumed that it had that same effect on everybody. That, like, and some of you who are new tonight might think that, like that everybody reacts that way. But it's like, as I've gotten to know more and more normie people in my life, because even when I got sober, for many years sober, I didn't know many normie people. Like, even the non-alcohol, the people who weren't in AA who I hung out with were usually a little malfunctioning. But like I live and work, and I've like dated girls who were normie today, and I described to them like those experiences I had getting loaded and like what it did for me, and they were just like, kind of like, I just never did that to me, you know, like they're like, you know, pot made me tired, or, you know, I drink 1 or 2, and then I'm like, I lose a little control, and I'm like, and that's enough for me, and I want to stop, you know, and I'm like, it's like, you don't feel like just like everything's great, and like, you know, like everything gets quiet, and you can, you know, and you can talk to people, and it's like, and they're like, and I really, and honestly speaking, and I'm not trying to make a joke, but like I really didn't know that for a long time. I thought that it did the same thing for everybody, and but I know for a fact that it does that for me. And it's like, I think it's true for a lot of people. If you get sober young and you come into AA young, you have this period where you get into your 20s or your 30s, where your life, if you're doing the steps and you're living like a sober life, where your life starts getting pretty functional and you're hanging out with a lot of normie people, and a lot of people stop and reevaluate whether they need to be here or not. And the way and some people reevaluate it by drinking again. And I reevaluated it by going back to my first step and taking that honest look at what my relationship to alcohol was. And that's the answer I came up with, is that's how I relate to alcohol. It's how I've always related to alcohol. And it's not, that's a biological thing that's not going to change with some good therapy and some better habits. And so I need to stay away from it for my life, and I'm definitely afraid of it. I'm definitely afraid of ever drinking again. And I had there was a guy who was sober when I got sober. I'm skipping around a lot, but there's a guy who was sober when I got sober, and his name was John, and he was like 40 years old, and he had blue hair and a mohawk in this meeting, the Hermosa Young People's meeting. And John is still sober today, and I remember he would say in meetings, he would say like, you know, most of you will drink, you know, I'll probably drink too. We're all probably going to die drunk. And people were like so bummed on that. They're like, that's such a cynical thought. Like, but it's, you know, the thing that he said behind that is, it's like, but you know, we're not, but there's no way I'm drinking today if I just stay focused on today, if I do what I have to do today. But I do live with that constant fear that the thing that will most likely, percentage-wise, the thing that most likely I'm going to die of is not going to be cancer or falling in a rock climbing accident. It's probably going to be alcoholism. I'm probably going to pick up a drink. And because of that, I got to stay on my toes. So that's why I do a lot of the stuff I do today. So going back to high school, I started back to high school that year, and up until that point, I'd been a good student. I'd been a bright kid. I tested, as my friend Dave says. I shouldn't say I was bright. I tested well, and I didn't necessarily have to work really hard, but I tested well, and I got into like this Catholic boys' school, and they gave me like a scholarship. And my parents were forking over a bunch of money for this school, and I did well in that school for like a year, and then. The thing is like that first time I got loaded, I made this decision right when it happened. I said, I'm going to do this as frequently as possible from now on. And as frequently as possible initially, because I was a good nerd boy, you know, I was a good student. I was like doing well in school and all that stuff. As frequently as possible wasn't very often, because there weren't a lot of people rolling up to me saying, hey, Brez, you want to go smoke weed at lunch? Like, I wasn't like a cool kid, so it wasn't really available to me. So it was like when it came around, I would do it. And as I started to see like really quickly, like I'd never been the best at anything. I was always too short to be very good, like at any sports. I was never very good at soccer. You know, the only thing I was good at was being smart. I started going to this new school. I'm not even the smartest kid anymore. And I thought to myself, I'm going to be the best stoner in school. Like I'm going to be the burnout. And that looked kind of cool, like, because there were these kids. I remember seeing these kids, like this guy Chris, and he was like the burnout of school, and I'm like, that looks good to me. Like, I want to be that guy, because like everybody knows him. He's like he's kind of famous, and so I wanted that. I kind of wanted that, and so I set off on sort of a bizarre plan to try and orchestrate that, I guess. And just like I said, to do it as often as possible. And at first it was like a little bit, and then it was more, and then I started to realize I was working at Target, being a stock boy when I was like 16, and I started to realize, you can do it after work. You could get guys to buy you booze, like the older stock guys, like to buy us booze, and you could drink after work, like pretty much any night you were working. And then it was like, and you could bring stuff to work, and when somebody asked you to go check on a television in the back, see if you have it, you go back to the trailers and you smoke weed in the trailers. And so I'm like realizing you could do this much more often than I had thought, like not just weekends at parties. You can't buy alcohol at school, but you can buy drugs at school. So you can buy, I could buy some LSD. I could take LSD at school. And that didn't go very well for oral. I gave an oral presentation once on chemistry and LSD, which is kind of ironic, but I just and I didn't have a lot of sense about it, and I didn't have a lot of control about it. But at the same time, everybody else was doing things the way I was doing them that I could see. Like most of the kids in Southern California was a crazy place at the time, and like it was like there were a lot of other kids doing what I was doing, and my opinion of it was like, people are coming, when people started to like get in my way, like when obstructions, people started coming down on me about how my grades were dropping, and people about my behavior. My first reaction was like, what, people are overreacting. Clearly, people, my parents are overreacting. When the school started to get upset and like call me in for like meetings or giving me extra detention and stuff, I just felt like people were overreacting, or that I was getting caught more than other people, and that it wasn't my fault. And it's kind of accelerated quickly. Over the course of about a year and a half, I went to, I started, there was something kind of wrong with me before I got loaded. My parents were taking me to doctors and stuff, psychiatrists and family counselors. And by the time I was 17, by the time I got sober, I had probably been to 3 lockup rehabs, an outpatient rehab, and had seen 3 or 4 therapists. And, after, it was like just deteriorated really quickly. And after each one, it was like my attitudes kind of started to go from, they put me in that first rehab, and I was like, people are overreacting, and I'm gonna break out of here. I'm gonna jump the fence. I can get out of here. These other guys, my friends, are gonna come pick me up, and I'm gonna run away. And which I never did, but I eventually settled into the rehab, and I kind of got with I realized that what you got to do in rehab is you got to pretend you want to be sober. So so I pretended I wanted to be sober for a little while, but during that very first rehab, it was when I was still 16, and I was at Charter Hospital. And this guy, one of my good friends, this guy Tim, his dad Pat, came to the hospital. And Pat came he brought one of his friends. And I didn't know him really well. I knew that I liked him. He was like kind of a cool dad. And I don't mean like a cool dad like he gives you whiskey to drink. Like he's just cool, like he's a really nice guy. One of the nicest people that I knew, any nicest adult that I knew in my neighborhood. And he came to visit me, and I'm like, "Hey, what are you doing here, Mr. S?" I really couldn't figure out why he was there. He wasn't really close to my family. He wasn't, I didn't have I didn't know why this guy was coming there. And he's like, "Steve, I've been sober in AA for 20 years, and I had a whole other life before I was Tim's dad." And he started telling me this gnarly story. And he brought a friend who was like more of like a 60s drug story, like an NA story, because he thought I would relate to that more, which I didn't. But I mean, because that's what I looked like. I had like long hair, and I had like Guatemalan pants. I was like a total deadhead hippie kid. And he just told me the story. And what was so unbelievable about it was I couldn't believe the picture he was describing me of, like how messed up he was before he got in this whole other life. I would have called him a liar, except that there was just no reason for him to be coming there and lying to me. And he was the only adult who had come to me at that point who wasn't there to tell me what I was doing wrong or how I had to do. Everybody was coming and saying like, you need to do this, or you need to pull your head out of your, like everyone was saying stuff like that to me, And he was just like laying out this story, and he's like, I've been, and this is what I do now. I'm sober. I go to AA. I've been sober this many years, and he didn't really even have to tell me like what it was like now, because just everything I knew about the man was like awesome. Like I'm like I really like this guy, and I left that thinking, AA looks really cool, and I will do that if it ever gets bad enough, and I absolutely don't need it now. But I definitely filed it. That was my first exposure to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I remembered that. And after that, I get out of those rehabs, and I started. I would do this thing where I would try and keep the heat off for a little while. It was always about after that rehab, I had another one, and after that one, I started to think what I need to do is I just need to manage and control this a little better, and I picked up some tips from the big book. Had some great tips on there for how to manage and control your drinking. I thought they were tips. I didn't realize they were these are things we have tried. I guess I didn't really listen to all. I was going to meetings, but I wasn't really listening to everything. I just was catching bits and pieces, and I was like. Drink. Okay, I'll drink beer only. So I started trying to do that stuff, and that was basically my plan. After I started getting drug tested, that's when I started drinking beer, and I didn't even really like the taste of beer initially, but I really liked the effect. The first time I got just obliterated drunk, I was like, this is way better than smoking pot. This is if you drink enough, you can just turn everything off. It's just black. I like blackout. Blackout drinking was not an accident for me. It was a goal. It was I really enjoyed that. I'm told that heroin's a lot like that, and that I should never go near it. I never did that. But I remember one night that was kind of typical of my drinking is. I was at home. I had this problem where I could, near the end, where I would try and go to bed at night, and what I would do is I'd wait till my parents went to bed they'd go to bed around 10 or 11, and I would sneak out. I would open up my window, and I'd sneak out the window, and I'd walk to this vacant lot about a block from my house, and I'd have a stash of either booze or drugs there, and I would get, as obliterated as I could until I was ready to pass out, and then when I felt like I had hit the mark, and then I would walk home and pass out in my bed. And I had to do that pretty much every night, and I didn't see this clearly until a year sober. But that's, I don't know how to fall asleep. I just didn't know. I didn't know what falling asleep. I never fell asleep once unless I was in rehab. I never fell asleep for 2 years. On those nights where I couldn't find it, I would go down to I'd ride my bike or I'd skate usually. I'd skateboard down to a liquor store near my house, and I'd get somebody to buy for me with money I had stolen from my parents. Or on this occasion, I hadn't been able to steal, raise any funds. But one of the things I did is I'd break into my parents' room and steal money from my dad, because he would just leave cash around, being an idiot, and and I would take it, and that's how I usually bought my booze when I ran out from my excellent paying job at Target. So this night I couldn't, so I went to the liquor cabinet, and they had a liquor cabinet that had the plastic safety locks left over from when we were 6 years old, and I was like, God, these parents are morons, and just open the safety lock and pull out, and they just didn't secure it, and I pulled down a bottle of vodka and a jug of Chablis, the old Ernest and Julio Gallo Chablis, and I drank I made this big cocktail of Chablis and vodka and drank this whole thing. Yeah. But I remember, the thing I remember about it is I didn't put the stuff away. I forgot. I don't know why. I started to walk around the kitchen island to get back to my bedroom, and before I even got around the kitchen island, everything started to just close down, and I just remember thinking to myself, perfect. This is exactly what I was going for. And it was, and I just remember waking up the next day with vomit. There was vomit all over me, and I was in the bathtub, and I don't know how I got in the bathtub. It turns out I had thrown up in my bed, and then I had woken up and noticed, and then got in the bathtub, and then my dad was walking past me the next morning. I was like, oh, I think I have the flu. I'd left the bottles out in the kitchen, and so I wasn't a very smart drinker, and that's probably has a lot to do with how I got sober as young as I did. Even when I was doing, I did a lot of things really stupid, and it was mostly just that. All I can say is I didn't really think about it very much. I had a singleness of purpose about me, and it just was more important than everything. And so the getting sober part was the last experience was I had started kind of going to was going to meetings in this sort of 1 a week way. I was going to one meeting a week because I was a mild case, I knew I had to be sober, so because I just knew I had to be sober because I was like on some sort of weird probation at the time, and my parents were at this phase where they were like, they had looked into, they were very they weren't just going to kick me out because they were like, they were like these upstanding people, and so they went to the lawyers and they were like getting the documents to like have me declared an emancipated minor, and they were going to have me like whatever that's called. I declared an incorrigible, I think is what it was, and they said, well, we've got these papers, ready, and the deal is you need to like pull your act together. And I had like 6 months until I turned 18. They're like, you got to pull your act together and I was like, well, I'm going to these meetings, and I was going to like this NA meeting, like one a week, and they're like, I'm sober, I've been sober for 30 days, and they're like, we really don't care, you're an asshole. And and so they had told me like if I broke curfew again or if I got loaded again, they were going to send me to this one last lockup, and if I didn't pass and then if that didn't work, then they were going to sign these papers and it would be done. And I went out this one night, and I was like, it was sort of, for me, it was the experience of like making a decision that I was going to be sober. I was very committed to being sober at this point because it was really, really important. I knew my parents were going to send me to this place, and they told me so. They said, if you mess up tonight, because it was I got kicked out of the Catholic school, and just another brief, I guess, the sketch of everything else that was going on at that point. I had gotten expelled from the Catholic school. I was like terrorizing, like physically, like being violent with my 2 younger sisters. My parents had locks on their bedroom doors, their second-story windows, on their closet inside their bedroom, on all their bureaus, and they had a safe in the closet. And the only thing I never got into was the safe. I stole when they'd go out of town, they'd lock the garage and put a locked cover over the van, and I would break the lock, and I'd break the lock on the van. I would just steal whatever. I'd say I'd steal anything that wasn't nailed down, but I'd steal anything. And I was very committed to it. Like I had to drive to I just want to steal stuff. And it was totally without conscience. Like I would scream at my mom on like at least once a week. I would scream at my mom bad enough to make her like curl up in a ball in the kitchen and cry. And then I would think, you're such a bitch. You're doing that to make me feel bad. Like you're just trying to make me feel guilty, and it's not going to work. Like I don't. This is just a manipulation. I had no feelings at all. Like, when I went to that, when I finally did get sent to this program. Well, the way I got sent there is I went out that night to party with like all my old friends, and not to party, but like to see all my old friends from the Catholic school I'd gotten expelled from because they were having a party 4 blocks away. I was going to go to this party and not drink because I had to not drink. Like I was completely committed to it. There's no way that I could drink and if I drank, I was going to be in handcuffs the next day on a plane to Utah, and I knew that. And I went there, and people were offering me booze like for 2 hours, and I was turning it down, and I was really impressed with myself. And after 2 hours, I was telling everybody about it. I was telling everyone how I'm sober now, and like I don't drink anymore, man, dude. I go to meetings, and I'm sober, and it's cool. And they were like, "That's good, man. That's good because you were really bad. It's good that you're not drinking." Like people were like patting me, like being like, "Yeah, good idea." And then some guy like came up to me at like 10:30 at night, and I have to be home at like 11:30. And this guy's like, "Hey, Brez, we got some stuff, and we're gonna go to West Hollywood, and we're gonna drive around for a couple hours. Do you want to go?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah." And I got in this van, and it's like one of my friends who I'd been telling about my new sobriety and the penalties if I didn't keep it, and they watched me get in the van, and they're like, "Dude, what are you doing?" And I was just like, like. F it, like who cares, and I knew like this is totally insane, but it was a perfect to me, like when I went over my first step with my sponsor, it's like we reviewed that situation, and it's like that was the perfect example of like having like a mental obsession beyond my control. Like my best idea is like being committed to not getting loaded. Like something happens, the mental defense, it's like, I don't know. It's like I think about it like on Star Wars where they have the shields, like, and they're like then the guy's like, something's happening and the shields are going down. It's like, and that's like me with like the drinking thing, like, it's like Obi-Wan Kenobi is like dropping the shield, but it's like it just drops, like whatever the defense is, it goes away, and then the can ends up in my hand, and I'm just like, seems like a good idea, and I just like, and I know even like today that's how it's always going to be. Like there's somewhere out there's a can, and if the shield isn't up, it's like it's going to seem like a good idea, and like why not? Everyone else is doing it. I'm like, hey, my wife drinks wine socially. So I got the next morning I'm in handcuffs and on a plane to Utah, and that was where I made my surrender. Like the reaction I'd had to the previous rehabs of like, I'm going to bust out of here and you can't control me. It was like totally different. Like I'd spent like I don't even know what, I want to say it was 18 months out of the previous 2 years, like locked up, wearing clothes I was told to wear and being told, and ate what other people told me to eat. And I was just getting really tired of it, and I could see really clearly. I had like a moment of clarity where I could see like the rest of my life was going to be just like this. Like after this, I'm going to do crimes because I'm already doing them. Like I'm going to do crimes. I'm probably going to get caught because I'm a bad criminal, and I'm going to go to jail, and I'm just going to do this the rest of my life. And like I had this image where like I started seeing homeless people on the street, and I started thinking like I always just thought people were born homeless. Like I just thought like they came out. They're like 2 years old and like walking down the street asking for change. And I saw the connection for once. Like I said, like, I'm like, dude, that's how you're going to be there. Like I had no like street living skills. Like I was not going to be able to go on the street and hustle and do well. Like I was completely ill-equipped. And so I made the decision that on the plane that I knew that I was going to get sober. And I'd had some exposure. Like I said, I'd had exposure to AA before that. Part of it was that guy, Pat, who had come and spoken in my rehab. A couple other guys I can think of one other guy who's also still sober today, a guy, Sean, in L.A., and Sean was doing H&I work. He was coming and doing panels in the rehab I was coming to. And so he came, I remember he had come and told his story, and he was close to my age, and I knew because of that there was like this big young people scene in Southern California, and I was deathly afraid when at that point that like I'm 17 and I can't handle like just the whole thing you hear from anybody who gets sober young, like, oh, they're all old and I can't stand, I'm not going to have any fun and blah, blah, blah. Well, I got out of there. I mean, I was at that point where it was like, it kind of doesn't matter if I'm going to have fun or not have fun. I don't have any other better plans. Like if AA is really boring, I'm going to have to go. But fortunately, it wasn't. It was like there were these young people's groups, and I went to them. And the people in the young people's AA groups in Hermosa Beach were like way cooler than the people I hung out with who were getting loaded. Like they had this was like this is like 1990 in Southern California, and there were these guys, and I walked in the room and these guys, and I was like a hippie and I didn't really care about punk, but I knew enough about it, and there were like these guys who had been in punk bands that I knew of, and like they're like they have tattoos and everything. And some of them had also come and spoken at my rehab. There were these two guys I remember specifically who had come, and I was just thinking like, well, you guys are too tough to get sober. Like I just can't. I couldn't. It was you're too cool. You're too tough. Like to be sober, to accept this whole God thing. And they were doing that thing that people talk about where they were using the F word and God in the same sentence. And that was like, and I started to think like this is a God I could maybe do business with, because I'd been going to. Because I had been up to that point, like I'd been religious, like religion was not my problem, like believing in God wasn't my problem. It was like, but I didn't have any sort of concept of God that was like of any use to me. Like me and God were not business partners. Like I wasn't, I could pray, I would pray for rescues, but I had no idea like how to get through the day, like. So these guys, the thing that happened first of all was that I found out that these guys had a meeting that they went to every Sunday night. So I started going to that meeting. And I went to that meeting and everybody was like, people were friendly and people welcomed me. Guys started offering me rides. I thought my parents were going to drive me to AA meetings when I got out of rehab, and I got home and they bought me a skateboard, which was nice. And they were like, you can skateboard to meetings. And all the meetings were like minimum like 3 miles from my house. And so I started skateboarding to meetings, and when I got out of I'd go to school every day, and then I'd skateboard to meetings. And these guys started giving me a ride home. That guy Sean, who spoke at that rehab, started giving me rides. He started giving me rides home from meetings. When he started to see that I was serious, like I kept skateboarding to these meetings and showing up, and I found out they had a circuit. Like if there were these people who were nice to me, like they remembered my name and they knew who I was. And you could go to meetings every day of the week if you knew which ones to go to, and you'd see those same people. And so I started to do that. I followed the little pattern of people, and so now I'm going to like a meeting every day, which I really needed to do because I was still in that mode where every night at 10 o'clock I felt crazy. I felt like sneaking out the window and going to my vacant lot, and I felt like that every night. And so I would go out to meetings and just and drink coffee. I'd go to a meeting every night, and I would drink coffee with folks, and I'd wear myself out. And sometimes I'd get home at midnight, and then I'd go skateboarding for like until 3 a.m, just to wear myself out until I could pass out. And I did that for a number of years. And the first thing that I started to get from that is I started to get first of all like a faith in God. I started hearing people talking about like I didn't have to be I'd come from I'd been going to like this Christian youth group, and I liked it, and I didn't abandon it when I got sober. I still like believed in this Christian youth group thing that I brought, and I brought that into AA for several years. But I got this new operating system where they were like, you don't have to be performing at any certain level to be talking to God and for him to listen. Like, you can just be totally messed up. You can start where you're at. Like, you can just ask for help and you'll get it. And so I started doing that. Like, I started praying and feeling like I started to feel it sort of like palpably. Like, people just told me, like, if you do this, it'll work for you. And I don't know if it was like a placebo, like the Dumbo thing with the feather thinking you can fly, but I started to kind of feel it. Like, I would pray and it did start to feel like things were better. And I got this, and people would tell me, like, do this, if you do the steps, if you start get a sponsor, you start calling them, doing the steps, you'll feel better. And the thing was like I started to do that, and I did start to feel better. And I don't know why. Like, I couldn't figure out. Nothing seemed to be happening. Like, I wasn't making amends. I wasn't like tearing through the book. But I had this feeling like when I would like do a little bit of writing or do an assignment or call my sponsor, I'd had this feeling like I'm doing something that I'm supposed to do, and I haven't had this feeling for a really long time. And the reason I was willing to do it is because there were these guys who were crazy looking, really like they were like these punk rock guys, like, who looked like me and who told stories like that I could relate to. And I just thought, like, if they can do it, then maybe I can do it. It wasn't working for me for some reason to go to the youth group and hear people talking about how to live a good life, because I just knew inherently that they weren't as mentally ill as I was. Like, they weren't messed up. They weren't dealing with the issues. Like, it's easy for you to do it. I mean, you've been Mrs. Goody Two-Shoes for your whole life, Mary. Like, I know that's easy for you, but I got problems. And that just didn't play in this group I was going to. I couldn't say that to these guys. I got because they were way worse. I mean, these guys were. I remember that's mostly what I thought when I was around these guys. Is like, these guys are messed up. Like, these guys are like, I still thought, like, I'm really happy I'm not that bad. But it's like that was so much power in that. Like, guys who to me seemed like total criminals. Like, and they told me their stories, like the way that they're ripping people off, like in Skid Row, and like beating people up for heroin and all this stuff. And the guy who's telling me the story is doing me the service of driving 10 miles from his house to pick me up and then drive me to a meeting and then buys me a plate of fries at the meeting. And I just had trouble resolving these two things. Like, this guy who says was this evil and doing these terrible things, he's acting like this. Like, that was like this power there. Like, and it just started, more than anything, it just surrounded me. Like, it was just all around me. And it was like there was this movement afoot at the time that people were also getting really involved in, like, there was a young people's conference going on. And I remember my first young people's conference experience was that first summer. I'd been sober for a little while. I want to say like 6 months or something. And it was August. And one of the people in my group started saying, "Steve, you got to go to this conference in San Francisco. It's a young people's conference. It's going to be thousands of young people. It's going to be awesome." And I was just like, not interested, like, not going to do that. That doesn't sound cool at all. A conference? Like, I'm going to go to a conference. I mean, I was still in this stage where it was like, the steps looked like homework, like they had, and I hadn't been doing homework for a year and a half, and I wasn't going to start now. It's like, I was still in that stage of like, well, I'm reading the steps and I'm agreeing with them, so that's the same as doing them. So the way they got me to go to this conference is they said, everyone is going to leave. Like, you're going to go to all your normal meetings on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and no one's going to be here. The meetings are going to be empty. And I got scared. And I was like, and they told me the tickets were going to be $40. So I got a ticket for $40. I went to my first Icky Paw in San Francisco, and it just blew me away. It was amazing. All of a sudden, like, my world just got like 100 times bigger. Instead of just seeing like the same like angry 40 punk rock dudes who are sober every week, it's like I was seeing this huge world of people who like looked like I started meeting hippies and like preppy kids and like people who looked like every walk of life, like all these people and they were all so different. And they were all from different parts of the country. There were people from Louisiana and these guys from New York who were talking all funny. I met these guys from New York, and they shared a cab ride with them over, and it was just I just remember my head was spinning. Like, I can't believe like these people are sober everywhere. And I started to plant this idea in my head, like, wow, you can like do anything. Like, there's no limit. It's not like, oh, I get sober, I'm going to have a dull life now. It's like I can do, like, anything can happen. Like, anything that's possible, I can go anywhere. And I really kind of latched onto that for a while. And I don't want to say that I wasn't like doing a lot of work in the program. I mean, but the work I was doing in AA around the time was Like I was doing the H&I stuff. Like people were saying, probably once a week they'd say, we're going to go do a panel. We're going to go do a panel in Compton. I'm going to pick you up. We're going to drive to Compton. We're going to talk for a little while. We're going to go do a panel in San Diego. We're going to go do a panel here. That was like a big thing. Like go and do lots of panels. Go and tell your story. Go meet other groups. And there was a very strong ethic about it. And I don't know if I ever heard people say like, if you ever say no to AA, you'll drink and you'll die. But I guess I just saw it as an example. Like nobody said no. People just didn't. These guys just didn't say no. They just didn't. And I knew there was like some unspoken thing about like, oh, you don't want to say no. Like you don't want to say no. And so I did that stuff. And but I remember thinking at that point that I needed to explore this world. And kind of skipping ahead a little bit. Like so then I was still very much living in this world where the traditions, which are great, AA is like the most fantastic. This guy I was talking to a couple weeks ago, who was doing the H&I meeting with, was talking about how like AA is like the longest running, most successful anarchy in like human history. Like it's like we're an anarchist organization essentially, and but that it's like the traditions were a shield that protected me. Like they weren't a mirror to reflect my behavior the way they are today. It's like, but they were something that protected me, so I can get up during a meeting and go and smoke cigarettes and talk and poke my neighbor, and I don't have to do the steps, and I can flake out on my literature commitment, and you can't kick me out. And I just loved that about AA, and I banked on that for probably 3 years, and I started to. I met a bunch of people. I actually met these people at Equipa. I met some people who I also want to say that like I just heard from like 3 or 4 or 5 of these guys are still sober today in other parts of the country. We're all like 18, 20, 22 years sober, and but I met these guys who were following the Grateful Dead and staying sober. So I started following the Grateful Dead around the country, and I did that like for a little while. And I was with people who were very genuine about like being sober and very, very enthusiastic about it and trying to do the best they could. But it was really the blind leading the naked. I had a friend who was like my age. We had sponsors back in the cities that we came from, but we talked to them like once every 2 months. And so my sponsor had started me on an inventory, but he was very vague about the instructions. So I'm doing this thing where I'm like writing an inventory where I'm writing a name and then columns 2 and 3, and then the 4th column, just like that, like in that order. And I'm just adding to it as people make me angry on Dead Tour. And this thing turns into like this book. And by the end of Dead Tour, and I'm not living a very principled life. I don't have any service commitments, obviously. We're going to AA meetings as we can. But I ended up coming back from that, with a life that just wasn't, my style of living wasn't a lot different than it was when I first got sober. I was a taker. I looked at people and thought, what's this person going to do for me? Does this person have a ticket for me into the show? Is this person going to buy something from me? Are you going to, just like, what are you going to do for me? And I came back from that tour like $1,500 in debt and no safe place to go, like nowhere that would have me. My dad didn't talk to me for like my first 2 or 3 years sober. Like 3 years sober, I would call my house and my dad would answer the phone. He would hand it to my mom. And this is like around that time, and I call my parents and I'm like, I have nowhere to go. Can I come home to LA? And they were like, you can come, but you can't stay. You can come, but you can't stay. And so I started to come back to LA, and I ended up. I kind of skip ahead because it's not that important. Not a lot happened, but I came back to LA for a little bit. I ended up back in southern Utah, by some strange miracle, working at this job at the wilderness program that I had gotten sent to for I worked there for 9 months. I was a terrible instructor. I never should have been a counselor for young children at that time. But I ended up becoming a decent counselor while I was there, and then ended up back in LA with like 3.5 years sober, because the seasonal work of that job ended, and my parents begrudgingly let me stay home, and they said things are going to need to be a lot different. And I still owed a lot of people money. I'd see people around where I got sober, and I owed them money, and people were pissed at me. And it was like that thing where I'd really painted myself into a corner. And I'm at a Denny's one night, and I'm with my friend Lori, and I'm like, I think I was crying, if I remember correctly. I was crying, like I was upset. And I was and Lori and I had gotten sober together, and and she had started going to this group called the South Bay Survivors. And the South Bay Survivors, to me, was a group Maybe it's a group that's perceived maybe the way this group is perceived. And which was that there were like a lot of stories floating around about this group. Like this is they're going to make you cut your hair, and you're going to have to wear, dress a certain way, and you have to shave your face, and you're going to have to do, call your sponsor for an hour a day and do all these things. And the stories, I got to say, like my experience with those types of people when people are talking about groups like that, the stories are always worse than the actual experience of the group. Like I met with Lori, and Lori said, like, why don't you come to the South Bay Survivors? It's not what you think it is. It's really helped me. And she had whereas a lot of my other young people's friends hadn't moved very much in the 3 years that in the couple years that I had been gone, like following the dead. I came back to LA, and a lot of people were doing the same thing, living the same way. A lot of people who had helped me in my early sobriety, and they looked great when I had 30 days, but now I had 2 years and they didn't look so great anymore. Like I looked at their lives and I'm like, I'm not sure that's what I want. Like that's about what I have now. And it was still chaos and like a lack of peace and insanity. And so I started going to the South Bay Survivors group, and I got a sponsor named Larry, and I asked Larry to be my sponsor because Lori told me he would be a good sponsor for me. She said, why don't you ask Larry? And I didn't really know anything about Larry at all. I mean, I found out that he had been sober 15 years, and he was nice to me. He was just like, he smiled and he shook my hand, and he remembered my name the second time he saw me. And I just started kind of sight unseen, without knowing anything about this guy. I started working with Larry, and Larry was like, I look back, I think Larry of a lot like Mr. Miyagi from the Karate Kid, where he would have me he was really gentle and quiet, and he said things that didn't make any sense, and he would tell me to do things that didn't seem in any way related to my problem. And he started me doing this. The first thing he asked me to do was to call him every day, and I remember thinking well, that's a bit extreme. I've been sober for 3 years. I don't think I need to call my sponsor every day. And he was just like, well, maybe you don't, but you have to call me every day. That's the deal. You can call. If you would like me to work with you, you need to call me every day. And I'm not your sponsor. He's like, for the first week, I'm just, why don't you just call me for a week to try it out? If after a week of calling me, if you like it, then we can see if I can be your sponsor. So I had to call him for a week, and I honestly think that I didn't do it perfectly. I don't think I called him every day. I think I called him 6 out of 7 days. And fortunately, he was not a perfectionist. He's like, we'll give you a pass. So he agreed to sponsor me. And then the next thing was, okay, I want you to come to the South Bay Survivors group. I want you to show up at 7 o'clock. Meeting doesn't start till 8 o'clock. I hadn't been, up until that point, I'd probably been to 500 AA meetings, and probably I'd been to 2 of them before they started. I had never been to a meeting on time in my life. And now I have to show up an hour early to make the coffee. And to me, 15 minutes early to make the coffee is really something to be proud of. So I showed up 15 minutes early to make the coffee, and he was like, I've been here since 7 o'clock, I've been over at the Mexican restaurant, I came over, I made the coffee for you because you weren't here, and now I'm eating dinner, and you really got to show up at 7 to make the coffee. And I was like, son of a, I thought he was extreme. This guy is a fundamentalist. And so I realized, I slowly came to terms with what the agreement was, and he never called me puke. He never treated me badly. I gotta say, he was a model of how to treat people in general. He treated me as well as he treated anybody else. He always treated me with total respect and kindness. But he was the thing is it just didn't change. He didn't have a different message for me than he had for other people. He's like, this is the message. I only have this, and I will give it to you in this polite, loving way, but it's still only going to be this. I don't have anything else. And so I did that. So I started eventually showing up at 7, 10 to make the coffee, and I don't think I ever showed up at 7. But I got closer. I got much closer. I started showing up earlier to make the coffee, and I became a member of that home group, and started showing up at his house every Sunday, and every Sunday I would go over to his house. And Larry lived in a trailer in El Segundo, and he was an unemployed dock worker on the San Pedro docks. And I never really knew the story behind that until somebody told me the story on it after I moved away from LA about why that happened, and it was sort of it gave me a cold chill when I heard the story. And hopefully I'll come back to that in a minute. But he started just taking me through the book. And I was amazed that the steps don't take 2 years to work. The steps could be worked apparently in less than 6 months, and that surprised me. I thought on steps 2 and 3 that you were supposed to do some research on the origins of a religious God and formulate a paragraph on what you think that God is, and then what it might not be, and then compare the two. And I mean, like, I'd been doing all this stuff that people had been telling me in a good-hearted way, but the steps that I did with Larry were very different from that, and they were very, very fast. And like step 2 and 3 was so fast I don't remember doing it. It was like, he's like, okay, we're on step 4, and I'm just like, but I didn't tell you what I think of God. And he's like, don't care, like, we're writing an inventory. Shortly, I mean, I remember, the shortest version of that I can say is just that, like, I was, the things I remember about it is that he never told me what to do. He would do this thing. If I wasn't taking one of his suggestions, he would go and do it in his own life, and then the next time I would talk to him on the phone, he would tell me about it. When I was in my amends and I was stalling on my amends, he would go and make one of his some old amends or some piddly. He probably had to go and hurt somebody on purpose just to have an amends to make. And he would go and make an amends to somebody, and then I'd call him and I'd tell him how I wasn't making my amends, and he'd be like, I made this amends today and it was so cool. Like, I went to this woman and I was so afraid and I did this thing, and then I was just like, okay, like, I get it. And I always wanted to talk to him about other stuff. I'm like, okay, so I didn't make my amends, but I have another really big problem I need to talk to you about, and it's about my parents and how they're jerks. And it's like, and he wouldn't even talk to me about it. He would just be like, oh, I just want to talk about amends some more. And I just took the phone, like, ripped it out of the wall. I threw it across the room this one time. Like, you don't even listen to me. And that's what I thought. And again, I didn't understand that until years later either. But the thing that I remember about it is I was sitting at this place in Hermosa Beach at a coffee table with a couple of new guys, like 8 months after I had started working the steps with Larry. And I remember sitting at this table and thinking to myself, I feel comfortable and like I feel like good and at peace, like being Steve B, like who I am and being here. And this is the first time I've ever felt like this in my life, like anywhere. And I never remembered feeling like that. Like even loaded, like, because even when you're loaded, it's like it feels really cool, but there's something deep inside of you that knows that there's still something wrong with you. And it's like at this moment, like I felt like everything was okay, and I'd never had that feeling before. And it would be so fantastic if like the story ended there, and that was it. I mean, that was when I had like 4 years sober, and a lot happened after that. And I don't know how long I have to talk about it. 5 minutes? 10 minutes? How is it? 10 minutes. Okay. So a lot happened after that. Shortly after that, right around actually before I even got to step 10 with Larry, I took the job. Went back and started working at that wilderness program in southern Utah. And I just started to learn a lot more about, I've done the steps now, and now it's about like learning about life and learning how to continue to live a sober life from here on out. And so the first thing that happened is I took a job in Utah, and this was probably self-support for me really for like the first time, where I was, and it involved like living out of my car and working for a wilderness program. And I started doing that, and I started going in the meetings where I worked for 2 weeks, and then I'd have a week off. And the closest meetings were in Richfield, which was an hour and a half away, or they were in Salt Lake, which was 3.5 hours away. And so I'd occasionally go I would do AA as I could. So for the next like year and a half, I was going to AA by going to meetings in Richfield or going to meetings in Salt Lake. And I learned about the Grapevine. And the Grapevine, for those of you who don't know, is the AA meeting in print. It's a magazine. And there was the groups in Richfield, and even some of the smaller groups in Wayne County had a stack of grapevines, and I would just take, and they'd say, you can borrow these and take them and just bring them back. And so I would take these grapevines, like 3 or 4 at a time, and I would take them to work with me. And as I was working like in the woods, like doing hoods in the woods, survival skills with kids. And I'm still trying to do my steps. And this is before actually the small backpacker big book came out. So I'm like backpacking every week with like a full-size big book and like a pile of grapevines and a Walkman and speaker tapes and a little stove and a little coffee pot. And every morning I would go off before everybody would wake up, and I would go off in my little camp chair, and I'd make some coffee, and I'd read my grapevines, and I'd listen to speaker tapes. And I should say that I learned that from when I started to work there the first time, before I had any business working there, when I hadn't gone through the steps and I was in a scary way. When I started working at that wilderness program, there were like 8 other people in my training, and 2 of them were in AA. And one of them was really young in AA, and one of them was this guy who had been sober for like 15 years from Arizona. And that guy became like my default sponsor during that time. And I just kind of did what he did. That's what he did when he was out there in the woods. He would wake up every morning. He would do like drink some coffee. He'd have a morning meditation, and he would like listen to some speaker tapes. And I find that really works. I stayed sober, and I don't know if I got a lot more sane during that period, but I think I did make some spiritual progress. Like things started to work out for me. I started to. I also during that time, shortly after that, I started doing seasons down there, and then summers in Alaska. And in Alaska, where I was, there was one AA meeting a week, and it frequently didn't happen. And so the way that we did AA up there is we would go around. There were other kids in the camp who were also like early 20s. And a couple times a week, we would just get together at one of the trailers of the other kids who were like cleaning toilets or making beds at like in Denali National Park. And we'd just have these little AA meetings. And we'd write inventories and read them to each other. And we'd read grapevines. And we'd sometimes have a meeting where we'd like all listen to a speaker tape together. And there were times, some of the scary times, I got to say, and it just was scary. I mean, it is what it is. Not a judgment about what's going on, but there were times when there was an AA meeting in the schedule, and the person who was supposed to open the meeting didn't show up, and there was no AA meeting. And there were a couple times where I was the only person there. Like I was standing at the door, and there were like 11 people who were sober in that camp, and there were a lot of weeks where I was the only person standing outside the door waiting for the meeting to happen. And it was just because people we get into these mindsets of like, it's like, AA doesn't need me and my actions don't matter, and it doesn't matter if I show up to the meeting. And this was like a very concrete lesson that it matters. Like if I go to meetings, like even if I feel like I don't need a meeting, or if I've gotten what I needed, like when I show up for a meeting, it's that whole idea of like keeping a seat warm. My friend Dave showed me that in Young People's in Southern California. All the other older people in my Young People's meeting started going away. I don't like the Young People's meeting anymore. It doesn't speak to me. I don't get anything out of it. And Dave kept going to the meeting for years after that, like after everybody had left. And I can't tell you, like he was like a beacon of stability to me. Just the fact that he came every week. He didn't speak every week. He wasn't like the center of attention guy who needed to be the guy, like the guru of the meeting. He was just the guy who sat in the back and sat in the same chair. And it gave me so much hope that he was there every week. And it was like this lesson that I tell him today. He's also still sober. He lives in Santa Cruz. And I tell him today when I talk to him, like how much he taught me by doing that, like how important it is. I don't know why that would choke me up, but how important it is to keep showing up and keeping a seat warm for the people who come after. It just saved my life that Dave did that. And that's really weird. I tell that story a lot, and it doesn't usually make me upset. But it's because it's true, and it's powerful to me that all these people who taught me these things in my early sobriety are still sober. After that, I ended up in Salt Lake, and when I moved here to Salt Lake, I had a feeling I was going around to the meetings and I wasn't hearing for whatever reason, and it could have been because I had my head way up my ass, and that I was a really crazy kid, but I wasn't hearing the message that I had heard in Southern California. I wasn't seeing what I'd been shown. I hadn't been seeing the stuff. There weren't people like doing this H&I thing. I just didn't see them. And they may have been here, and I just didn't find them at the meetings they were going to. But it was making me crazy. And people were telling me like, "Oh, you're going to feel okay. Like you're going to adjust. You're going to, AA is different everywhere, and you're going to eventually accept it." And I lived here for 8 years, and I never accepted that. And I'm very happy that I didn't. What I ended up doing is I ended up, like it says in the book, it says like create the fellowship you crave. And so I just started doing the things that I was shown how to do. Like we started the Tuesday night, the basic young people's group that some of you might know. I got together with like 5 or 6 other people, and we just started going to that group. And I did it really bad at first. Like I didn't do a good job of I didn't follow my own principles when we started that meeting, as far as like going every week and sitting in the same chair and like acting nice. I didn't do that. Like I showed up when I wanted to. I was like a jerk. I wasn't really working my steps very well. I kind of had a dry period. And I don't remember what it was. It might have been when Mike B moved here. It might have been around that time. But then some other people came, and maybe they like reminded me of like what we have to do, like to do this thing. And I had this period, and I would spend a lot of time really angry. I was really angry because there were all these old timers and people to look up to and people to model healthy behavior for me back in Southern California, and I came here and I just felt like I couldn't find those people. Like there's nobody with anything I want, and people just aren't acting the way that I think they're supposed to act. And I couldn't find peers. I was having trouble finding peers. And I look back today, and it's been an absolute fact for me. There's a part in the book where it talks about creating the fellowship you crave, and that I can't remember exactly how it states it, but the idea is like, I was surprised to find that the people who were new, like who started to come around and who I was doing 12-step work, maybe I was sponsoring them, maybe I wasn't their sponsor, maybe I was just like sharing with myself and being of service as best I could. These people who like, first they're new and I'm like, well, I'm just doing this for you because you're new and I'm trying to help you out and I feel bad for you, and like, come over to my house and I'll make you some dinner and I'll sponsor you, take your call. And those people, like, a lot of those guys ended up becoming like my peers, like my closest friends. Like the fellowship rose up about me. It was like, and people become, and some of those people are still like my closest friends today, and are models of behaviors of how I should act. And I never would have imagined that when I met them. I never would have expected that. I thought, I had an attitude of like, what's in it for me? Like, where are the people who are going to help me and be nice to me and like show me where's my sobriety? Like, where's my message? Who are the people bringing it to me? And when I started trying to give it away and do it the other way and trying to share it with other people and make my life look at AA as more of it was a service, I started going with the idea, like, I started going to the young people's meeting, and for a while there, I hated it. Like, I really hated going. It was like, but I started to go. I'd go every week, and I didn't try and share every week. We did like a thing in the meeting where it was like maybe you share once a month if you go to that meeting regularly, and that was good. And just trying to do the H&I stuff and taking meetings to people, and being active as a sponsor and being available and like. Meeting regularly with guys and taking them through the book the way my sponsor took me through the book, and trying not to add anything to it. Just try and like remember. The hardest thing for me is to remember exactly how Larry did it with me, and just do that, and just try and just pass on exactly what was passed on to me, so that hopefully I don't mess it up. And I've just been really grateful for that. And I know I have like 2 minutes left. And I just wanted to talk about, like, I felt in some ways I felt like living here, I built up sort of like there wasn't exactly maybe a cult of personality, but to me it felt like in a way it was bad for me. It was bad for me it was bad for me in a certain way, and I moved away partly from my job. I went back to school. I had to change a lot of the ways I do things. I speak to my parents today. I paid my own, after being a spoiled kid and like mooching off my parents for the first 3 years sober. My parent, I didn't get any money from my parents in my mid-20s, and I went back to school. I paid for it by student loans. I paid for it on my own dime. Started paying my own rent. Started paying all my own insurance. Stopped borrowing money from my parents. Probably when I was 30, that was when that happened. I stopped borrowing money. Like when I got into a tough spot, I started to pay for it myself. I start doing this thing today where, like, when I go and visit my parents, I occasionally take my dad out for breakfast instead of just assuming he's going to foot the bill every time. I start trying to do little things like that. And the relationship with my parents got better, but I feel like I was in the middle of something else. So I'm pretty near the end here. What I was going to say is I went back to school. I got a graduate degree. I was sleeping like 6 hours a night for 3 years, going to grad school, but I was still sponsoring guys and going to meetings, and I got this great normie girlfriend, and we fell in love, and I got asked to give the commencement speech at my graduation, and I'm thinking to myself, when it was happening, I was like, this is so great, man. I'm going to go to Ickipon, I'm going to tell this story in front of thousands of people, and people are going to see how great AA works, because I'm on top of the world, I'm like the AA poster boy. I thought all my hard work has paid off, and now I'm going to sit on the throne and get all my rewards. And it totally came apart. I went, I went back to, I went to Nepal with this girl. We broke up. I broke up with the girl. I came back and the economy crashed, and the job I had at the architecture firm, I lost the job. I started suffering from terrible depression. I started having problems I was losing sponsees. Everything just fell apart. And I was bad in a bad way for 5 years. And I was talking to somebody a couple of days ago, about just what that's like. And I was seeking for anything I could find. I was looking for the most fundamentalist AA because I was sure that was what the problem was, is I just wasn't doing it right, and I needed to get back to my roots. And I'm like going on the web, and I'm finding like the craziest like right-wing AA, like we do it the way Bill and Bob did it in 39, not in 1940, 39, and it's like. And I just found, and I got really dogmatic, and I got rigid, and I got stiff, and it's like if you weren't doing it this way, you just weren't doing it right. And the thing is like I don't even know if it was working for me. Like I was trying to tell people like this is what works for me, and I know this is what works, and I don't even know if it was. Like, and something happened, and where I go today, like I go to meetings, I go to meetings regularly. I have a sponsor today who tells me like kind of like stay in your own movie. It's really not your business what other people do. The only thing you can share is your story and your experience and what you're doing. That's the most powerful thing you have is what you're doing. Like, are you praying? Are you meditating? If you're doing that stuff and you don't even necessarily have to tell people about it, people will just read it off of you. And that's like the most powerful 12 step you have. And then people will come to you and want to be around, and then it's easy to share it with them. And it's a much better way of living for me today, because I'm a controlling guy, and I get controlling and angry and dogmatic, and I'm sure that the way I'm doing it is the way that's going to work for you because it works for me. And I'm really glad that I have a sponsor that checks me on that these days. But he also is really active himself. He does a lot of work, and he tells me about it. And I'm very grateful for that. I'm grateful for everybody who's here. I'm really grateful for being asked to speak, and it was a privilege to come out, especially to see so many people, so many old friends that I love very much. And thanks very much.